Hey, what's up, family? As you can see, out for one of my infamous walks. So I had an appointment today and passed the place that I always go to walk on the way home. So just felt a pull to kind of stop here and do some thinking, some reflecting. So apologies, though. Hope you're having a good day. If you're not having a good day, as I always say, just know that the worst is behind you, because tomorrow is yet to be created. What we set our intentions on and for is what we manifest in this reality. So, if you didn't have a good day, before you go to bed and as soon as you wake up, I always say, set that intention for what that day is going to be like. There are ebbs and flows of life that we all go through, and unfortunately, things can't be rainbows and sunshines all the time. So, we will have those down moments, but we'll also have those moments, those periods where we fill up. So don't allow yourself to get lost in those down moments, kind of like I used to do. So, now I'm much better at transmuting that energy when it comes in and recognizing what it is. So that way, when I do find myself in those moments, I can work to move and shake that stagnant energy off, or do some reflecting, or I'm starting to get more into journaling and stuff, because I found just through a previous experience is that sometimes we just need to get things off of our chest, so to speak, or shoulders. And the easiest way, especially if you don't have anybody that you trust that you can talk to about, or that you don't think that you can tell, your quote unquote inner darkest secrets or emotions or insecurities to, definitely journal them down and write them down, even if it's just in your note app on your phone. It's definitely an app I leverage quite heavily on my iPhone, is that notes app, and just kind of journaling reflections and stuff. So right now I'm actually in the process of writing a book just about some of my experiences, and I've worked with AI to develop some kind of writing prompts to help me along with the book, get those ideas out of my head onto paper. So definitely would recommend, any of those avenues to be able just to get those things out, because I always find that people I interact with, when they tell me kind of the craziest things about their life, and one thing I've just come to realize is that it's not necessarily about what they're saying. It's just the fact that they feel comfortable to express that, and it's probably something that they've been carrying around for a long time and they've never been able to express it. So now that they've been able to get that off of their chest or shoulders, they now feel a lightness. And as someone who is sensitive to energy, and they feel that energy and can easily take on that energy, especially if you're a healer and feel like you have to rescue people, it can be easy to take on heavy energies from multiple places, and then all of a sudden you find yourself left with that energy and having feelings that you never thought or had before, and you're trying to figure out where it's coming from, and you go to the doctors and stuff, and they try and tell you all kinds of things. I'm not a doctor, I'm not trying to diagnose, anyone, but just going through, basically my experience, that, I started to realize that I was taking on other people's energies, and that was because I didn't know how to purify them or purge them, off of my energetic shell, that it was affecting my life in ways that I had no idea that it was, until I started doing the work to alchemize and kind of purify things. That did I really start getting back to that original version, or that authentic version of myself that always existed, but just got buried basically under all the clothes, as a good analogy, of people that I've interacted with over the course of my life, and on a daily basis, because I'm always playing the Superman, or feel myself playing that Superman role. Anytime I see somebody in distress, so to speak, especially the Aquarius side, thinks that they can heal it, and they're quick to, dive in and try and see what I can do to make that person's pain not exist, or at least feel better. not knowing in the same interim that one, a lot of times that's an individual's path to walk, and that pain that they're experiencing in that moment is really meant to teach them and help them see brighter truths or bigger truths. And the more we interfere with individuals and their lives in those circumstances, it's really delaying the lessons that they're here and they signed up to learn themselves. So not to say not to help people and stuff, but just be mindful of the energy that you're picking up along the way, especially if you're somebody that's sensitive to energy, and you get you're around lots of individuals. It's always good to find your own practice, or if you want to say the R word, your own ritual, as far as what it takes for you to daily cleanse. So that's something I'm working on getting in the habit of. I do cleanses. I don't do them as consistent and often as I should, but I do feel a sense of lightness and stuff whenever I do them. So, but this is something that kind of came to me. So, I guess, Spirit Divine wanted that message out there. So, because the real thing I was thinking about was just sitting here reflecting on some recent soul checkpoints, I'll say, that I just recently went through, and just kind of meditating and trying to discern what those individual lessons were meant to teach me. So, and just started going through it, the thought process, my ego trying to take me off track and think about some other things. But, so a couple times I did have to pull myself back to the thought at hand to really kind of focus on it, to dive through it and go back through things. So, and it got me just looking at my family line, as far as, you've heard the term breaking generational curses. So, I'm definitely a big believer in that, or generational cycles. And so, I've definitely realized that a lot of the things that were passed on to me were because those that came before me that embodied those energies, they never took the time to heal themselves, or to help alleviate those pains, those trauma and stuff that they felt during their life cycle. And they, in essence, just passed it down further in the DNA. So the reason I'm saying that is just because one of the checkpoints that I had to go through, I just, basically was talking through, as far as just going through, was definitely around the abandonment. I would say, I don't want to say wound, but just around abandonment in general. So, and just how certain, I don't want to say, as far as like my parents, they definitely weren't emotionally available. They were great. They always took care of me and my brother, ensured that we didn't want for anything. We had a great life. So, but the one thing that we were lacking or did miss out on was just having that emotional availability. And so I went through my life basically embodying that as well. And so because I didn't really know love on an emotional level, anytime someone showed me love, I was always latching onto them and basically taking it to the extreme, as far as the affection I would show because of the feelings that I had and not wanting that person or that individual to abandon me. And so as I go back and look at the various checkpoints that the divine has placed in my way the past couple years, I can definitely see where that characteristic definitely popped up and reared its head in those situations and caused me to become engrossed in those situations, or enmeshed, I would say, is probably a better term, in those situations that I should have been able, that spirit was basically looking for me to approach, recognize, say maybe the attraction was there, but not turning it into a romantic or romanticized friendship or sole basis for connecting with another individual. You've always heard the term of keeping it platonic and stuff. So in essence, I would say that was one of my lessons or checkpoints that I had to go through, was not allowing that abandonment wound to cause me to over love or over nurture someone, thinking that by me doing that and being different than other people, that they would come across or be unique, that would cause them to not to leave me or not to quote unquote abandon me. But eventually in the end, when the abandonment did manifest itself, then it obviously threw me into a cycle, into a spiral, to where in essence I had to recover from or rebirth myself from each and every time. And in a way, I'm thankful for it, because it did make and contribute to my level of resilience that I have right now. But it definitely, of someone looking on the other side, I wish I would have learned the lesson a lot sooner, because it would have saved me a lot of heartbreak and turmoil. But then again, that's what lets us know, one, we're human, and lets us know that we're alive, even though it may not be exciting in the moment. That's part of living. And when we look back, we'll remember the emotional ups and downs. We won't remember the parts of our lives that was just, still, just moving. Anybody that knows those waves and stuff, obviously when you're feeling good, you're at the top of the wave, it feels good. And then when you're in the bottom, you remember that low point, but it's that point, that equilibrium point that's right in the middle, is that where we get to. And I would say, for the most of us, I don't want to speak for everybody, but I would say it's in that middle part where there's no excitement, there's no sadness, so to speak, that we sometimes don't often remember too well, because there's nothing tying that memory to anything energetically. It wasn't the best birthday ever because we were so happy or so excited, and it wasn't the worst birthday ever because something tragic happened either on that day or around that day. Those are the things that typically imprints on us. So I just started thinking back just upon my checkpoints over the past year or so, and the different interactions I've had, with members of the opposite sex. They definitely put me in a space of where I became infatuated and enamored quite early, and then I would start chasing to get that person to love me, to accept me. And so it wasn't until, I had one encounter that basically I recognized that behavior, and I put a stop to it. Basically I spoke to the other individual and let her know that basically I didn't like how I felt, and I didn't like how, I just didn't like how I felt in the connection and stuff, and how things were going. And so, because of that, I would be kind of discontinuing our connection, our association with one another and stuff. So, and that really gave me an empowering, I will always remember that feeling after that situation where I made that statement and that offer, is that it was definitely one of empowerment, one from someone, has never done anything like that before, to all of a sudden is now standing up for themselves and protecting their energetic boundaries. So it just got me. So that's just some of the things I was just kind of thinking through, and some of the other situations that have happened along the lines. And it's really shown me how far I've come along the way, and how much work I've really done on myself, to where now when I approach situations, or I'm in situations, especially with members of the opposite sex, and I think they're attractive, my first inclination isn't to try and get close to them, or try and get to know them, or try and, get into a relationship with them. It's really, working on and looking at my own sovereignty, recognizing, yes, the other person is attractive, but, what I'm working on, what I'm doing, what my aim is doesn't align with this particular individual for what I know about them. Not to say that it can't change the more you get to know them and get to understand their hopes, wishes, and desires. But at that moment, it doesn't align. So it's okay to keep it platonic, but just know that not to get infatuated just with the chase or with the potential of the situation, just letting things play out if it's meant to be in divine timing. So, and as I was thinking about that, I started going back through, my father, and just kind of looking at his life as far as what I knew about him. And I could see themes in regards to abandonment, or what I perceive would potentially be abandonment in his life. And it just got me realizing, damn, basically this and what I'm working on healing and what I have healed was a generational cycle that was passed down to me as someone who could take on that energy, but then could also alchemize it, because the only two options is either alchemize it or pass it on to the next generation and hope that they're strong enough to take it on. So basically, so I just started thinking about, because of that, just going through, I'm gonna take a break here, so because I'm at the end and it rained a lot here, so not able to cross the creek at where I normally cross at. So I want to do some journaling here next to the water, so I'm gonna take a quick break here and I'll go ahead and end this. But in essence, it just got me thinking about my dad's life and the things that he had went through, or at least from what I knew. And I started trying to identify, if I was in those shoes, at that time, how might I have felt abandoned? And it really got me to kind of think and see some of the situations in his life where, because my grandmother, his mother, she had to do so much to keep the family together. She had, I want to say it was like 11 or 12 kids. Unfortunately, my great grandpa, he wasn't really there. As the old saying goes, Papa was a Rolling Stone. So, that definitely described my grandpa. So my dad was the oldest out of the family. My grandma worked out of state. She was, as far as what I can recall, I think there was a family in Connecticut that she used to work for as like a maid. So extended periods of time, she would have to travel up there to live with that family while her family was back home, and she would send money back to take care of them. So I'm imagining my dad was the one that kind of took over the role of taking care of the family since he was the oldest one. How might that have felt of him not getting a childhood, not being able to run outside and play, forced into that quote unquote or pseudo leadership role to care for a family when you're supposed to be learning how to grow, learning how to develop, learning about yourself. And instead of you being able to do that, you're forced into another role that you didn't quote unquote sign up for, but now you're required to live because of circumstances. So just a little bit as far as kind of how deep, I go sometimes when I'm thinking about these situations, but I think it's really important and really key. And that's why they say that to spend time by yourself. They say isolation and whatnot, but you're never isolated. You've always got the divine, your spirit team, your spirit family around you to show you how much you're cared for. You may just be missing that body on body, like that love, affection. Sorry, Lynette's are kind of flying around now. So, of just having that hug from somebody. So, and that's where sometimes, they'll see that and they may send somebody in your path that'll give you a hug. Obviously somebody that you trust or somebody that you're comfortable with, as a way of reflecting that energetic impulse that you've had and you put out there, as far as just wanting to know that somebody cares. So definitely have to make some notes for that for next time. As anybody knows me, I can kind of get off on a tangent, especially when I'm, as I'm coming to realize is channeling, a lot of this information and stuff. A lot of times don't really have to go back and watch the videos myself just to kind of see what we talked about and stuff, or what I talked about, because a lot of it is just reflection, moments of reflecting on ideas and thoughts that I've had on my healing journey. So I was just walking and chilling and was just going through in my mind, like I said, just about recognizing that the last couple of interactions or checkpoints in over the past year was really moments to see if I've healed, my abandonment, wounding, so to speak. And I would say the first couple times I definitely didn't pass it. There was the third time, I would say, that was the time where I really kind of got my wings, so to speak. I started to go down that rabbit hole, but I caught myself and then shifted. And then I would say this last interaction that I just interacted with definitely sealed the deal for me, because I didn't, you always hear the term stoicism or being stoic, but definitely say that embodied my mentality during this time period. Is it could have easily been a situation where I went down a rabbit hole to try and step back into those old patterns, those old way of being. But, I stood my ground, stood in my solidarity, and actually overcome the situation and really felt empowered by it in that moment. So just know that it's not something that I am only capable of doing. And the whole point of this and my intention with making this video is just, one, kind of showcasing my process, but then also two, ask you, taking that time to be in isolation or just be by yourself from time to time whenever you can get it, without any music or without anything, so that way, music can help just for those that are into it, as long as it is something that you're not necessarily singing full time. It's just something kind of playing in the background as your mind is kind of still wandering and still thinking about things. So, but just spend that time in isolation, especially if you're somebody that's single, like I am. Don't look at this time period as being lonely, even though, you can definitely understand that, but look at it from the standpoint of the time that you have to be able to hear, your spirit family, from the divine, because you don't have people pulling on your energy. You don't have certain distractions going on that you would have otherwise, with people in your energy or in your ear 24/7, and just start seeing what revelations or what things are being revealed for you that may seem like thoughts, and just start kind of picking at it like an onion, revealing those various layers to see what's below and what's behind certain behaviors, because you're definitely going to face numerous checkpoints throughout your life, and you're either going to pass them and ascend to the next timeline, or you're going to quote unquote fail them and remain on that timeline that you have been existing on, during that experience. And that was one thing that I did with this trip that I just came back on, was really kind of revisiting places, reclaiming my energy, as I talked about in my previous video. But also one thing too is that I realized is that just talking it over was the fact that I'm actually collapsing timelines. So there were timelines that I existed on before that had certain loves, certain people that I had experienced that abandonment trauma with, that had remained open, or that was open, because even though in my mind I had moved away from them, energetically there was still a cord, there was still a tether that was connected to those individuals. So just going back, and once I learned my lesson and, like I said, graduated and got my wings, I noticed interactions in the moment. I didn't realize that that's what they were. It was only after kind of coming back and looking through my notes and kind of talking to certain individuals that I realized that those moments, what they actually were timeline collapses of me basically closing old timelines that were associated with certain people, or specific people in my life that I no longer either resonated with or would even genuinely be able to connect with, just because of the amount of work that I have done on myself and the cycles that they were still stuck in themselves and haven't been able to ascend past. While on one hand it is sad to not be able to connect with those individuals or not have a connection to those individuals like was before, the joy is still there, because they can always put the work in to ascend as well, and you just never know where the divine may lead us at any given moment. So that's part of the beauty of being in alignment, because now certain situations that the divine spirit couldn't bring to you or couldn't set in your path, he or she can now. So I don't proclaim to say that God is one thing or the other, divine is one or the other. I look at it as a duality. The masculine side, the masculine and the feminine. It's the masculine side that comes up with the ideas, so to speak, and it's the feminine side that executes them. So, we can see that dynamic play out a lot in our life. So if I say he or she, don't get hung up on the verbiage that I'm using to define, this collective consciousness that we're all part of. So it's part of somewhat of my limiting beliefs, kind of still shaking just from coming from a very religious background. So, but like I said, just to kind of recap, the biggest thing that I would like for this video to kind of help you with is just sitting in quietness or whatever reflective state you have that you find yourself often thinking about things, and just reflect on what cycles you're either aware of, and look back at your family and just kind of start asking yourself internally, like, where is this coming from? Who did this come from in my family? And then as you start getting various names or people in your mind, just look at what you know about their childhood, their upbringing. If you don't know anything about it, definitely spend some time with them and just talk about it, and just ask them about their upbringing, what went on, what happened. And I can bet you that you would be surprised to know that, one, that was Spirit's way of directing you to where such a particular trauma or wounding came from, or cycle that you're repeating, that's where it came from. And you will be able to get examples as far as why it was happening. So that way it gives you things to look for in your own life, so that when those things pop up, you're able to move past those things. You're able to recognize those and discern them in the moment. But then in that discernment, in that recognition, being able to move past it and break that cycle for your family, so that way it's not being passed on to future generations, or your children, because you're repeating it just like, that individual that you thought about was repeating them and imprinted them on yourself. Because the biggest thing is life, this school that we call life, is already interesting enough with all of the emotions that come with living in this existence. We definitely don't want to imprint anything extra, on those. We have the duty to help raise or help bring into this world, because they come here with their own experiences, their own wish list of things they want to accomplish, and we want to give them the best foundation possible to build from, so that way they can have their own experiences and their own experiences in this world. So I'm going to go ahead and end it there, family. So I definitely could kind of talk on for days as far as that's concerned. So like I said, the biggest intention is just, if anything, letting this be an example of somebody that's looking back on their lineage to see where certain woundings kind of come from, especially as you graduate from those woundings into the newest version of yourself. Spend that time in isolation, to really listen and reflect on things. It doesn't matter if it's only 5 minutes, only a couple minutes, in between, running tasks or errands and stuff. Just take that minute to really just think, reflect, and see what things in your life, you're repeating just because it's what people before you did, but it's not something that you're feeling in your heart or you're feeling called to do. You have a calling, that's something else. Just take that time to do the reflection, figure out why, and then see what it is that you need to do to not repeat those same cycles going forward, so the next time you come across or come in contact with a checkpoint from the divine to see, has so-and-so learned their lesson, you can knock it out of the park. I want to say something, cuss right there, but I'll keep it PG, so to speak. So when you find yourself against those tests or around those scenarios that do pop up, you knock it out of the park, and you graduate and get your quote-unquote new wing feather, because that's another cycle that you've broken, that you're no longer going to pass on to your family or to your children or to future generations. So just know I love you, family. I love you so much. Just as I was walking, I was just like, oh man, I got to make a video about this, because this was definitely, just even for my own reflection, just to look back on, as a milestone moment, because I really feel like it's a big milestone moment for me, and I'm happy, I'm excited, and just wanted to kind of share my journey, my experience, kind of getting to this moment for anybody that, is going through their own or will go through their own at some point. So, but like I said, just know I love you, family. Thank you for spending some time with me. I know time is precious these days. So just any moment you're spending with me, especially if you're looking to get better, to ascend, especially to be a better man or better woman, better father, better husband, better wife, better partner, better aunt, better uncle, better stepdad, stepmom, anything. As long as it's about improving, getting better, I'm all for it. So do me a favor, if you feel comfortable and you feel called to, just drop down what generational cycle you're currently working with, you're currently dealing with, or you're currently reflecting on. So that way, one, you can see that you're not the only one that's going through it. And then also, two, maybe some other people that have gone through similar situations, they can offer their insight on what they did to help them get through those situations and those circumstances, and to see the new version of themselves that they are right now and that they embody. So, but as I say, family, I love you, I love you, I love you, I love you guys so much. Guys, gals, everybody, I just love you so much. I hope my moments of vulnerability to show you, truly who I am and what I've had to go through in order to get to the point that I am. I hope that it at least helps at least one person, at least somebody. If not, then, these will serve as great moments to show, my kids and my, my eventual kids that I want to have, and my eventual grandkids that I'll have, just show them how cool of a dad, or how cool of a grandpa, a great grandpa, for future generations that I don't even get a chance to meet. Just look at the work that I put in to create the future that they get to live in. So, there's an old saying that comes to mind that, I can't remember exactly how it is, so don't butcher me too bad, but it's about planting a tree and how we'll never get to enjoy the shade of that tree that future generations will get to experience. So like an oak tree, we can plant the seed for an oak tree, but it takes, years, if not tens of hundreds of years, in order for them to grow a certain way. So the person that planted that oak tree is not going to be able to see it at its full maturity. And the people that come along to enjoy that tree by planting, like tree swings, or just enjoying the shade of it for a picnic, the individual who planted it will never get to see it. So yes, also too, this is kind of my time capsule just for those that come after me later on in future generations, just to know, how much I love you and how much work I'm putting in to create that ultimate timeline for you to experience and for you to get to enjoy. And heck, for me to be able to maybe one day reincarnate into to get to enjoy some of that shade and stuff, at a later date. So, but family, just know I love you. I love you, I love you, I love you, I love you so much. You'll never know. If you have any topics, ideas that you would like me to speak on, especially as far as maybe how my journey is experienced, definitely leave those below too. And I'll make a video as far as my experience with it. So, but as far as I'm concerned, my intention right now is just to share my life story with you as far as I go, as I journey down this path of surrender, of openness and faith wholeheartedly to the divine and to spirit, as far as where they're leading me and where they're taking me and what they want me to do. So, Samuel in the Bible, he was asked a lot of things of him, by the divine, and he never knew what was coming of them. But, like a faithful servant, a faithful vessel, he did what was asked of him. And by no means am I comparing myself to Samuel, but, we're all vessels, we're all here for a purpose. So I'm just living mine out and just hope you can gain something from it. So, all right, family, for the third time, I love you, I love you, I love you. I hope you have a good day. Like I said, if you haven't had a good day, just do me a favor and set that intention tonight before you go to bed as far as what kind of day you're going to have and what's going to happen. As soon as you open your eyes tomorrow, recite that intention that you said the night before, and call out what things you want to happen during your day. Even close your eyes and just see those things happening, and I guarantee you'll be surprised at how your day turns out. So hope you have a good day. As a matter of fact, I know you'll have a good day. May this video bless you and whatever's going on in your life, especially if you're finding yourself going through tough times. Just know it gets a whole heck of a lot better. We got to have a little bit of rain before we get sunshine. Life will ebb and flow. So don't let yourself get caught in the low points thinking that that's all that life is, because you never know how close you are to that moment of going back up to the peak. So I love you. I love you. I love you. Hope you have a good day. And until next time, my friends.